Hi, everyone. It's me, Devon Coombs, CPA, MBA, School and Deloitte. And today we're going to be covering Law 2 for my book, 10 Laws of Finance, Displaying Wealth Consumes It. So all of these slides and all of the companion resources are available at the link in the description, where we have my master resource index that has slides, calculators, Excel workbooks, valuation toolkits, everything that you need. But today we're going to be focusing on this chapter from the book. So displaying wealth consumes it. What do I mean by this? And what I'm trying to say is, really, we have bad instincts from understanding what is successful at a surface level. We're terrible at it. And it's really easy to see with almost every aspect of life. Like, by the time you're in college, you probably have a friend who bought a car that they can't afford. On the outside, if you don't know that person, they're driving a very nice car and they look very successful. But if they funded it fully with debt and you know it's going to be repossessed in the next year because they can't afford it, then we know that they aren't inwardly successful, that they actually aren't financially stable. And so this difference between appearances and reality is what we're trying to understand through the study of finance. I'm going to give you another example of why this is so common in business, and we can understand why bubbles might occur in the marketplace. And so let's look at two different common businesses. Let's say you're going to one restaurant and you see it has great reviews on Yelp. There's a line out the door. There's not a lot of space inside. It's an excellent, beautiful restaurant and they have amazing food and the prices are actually pretty reasonable. And then you go the next day to your family's favorite restaurant. That's the steady takeout business, let's say poke or sushi, and they do it cheaper than everyone and it's still pretty solid. They don't really have any space in the store, but most people just go there for takeout. Now, if you look at these two restaurants, most people will look at the fancy restaurant and say, wow, this place is really successful. And you'll look at the smaller kind of mom and pop shop and say, these guys might be really struggling. Well, what if I told you your intuition was completely wrong? Most of the time, and we know this, most of the time when we go to those nice areas that have fancy restaurants, those restaurants are turning all of the time. They only survive 12 to 24 months because they have an expensive lease, they have expensive headcount to maintain, the service quality expectations are high, the food costs are higher. Everything is more expensive about running and maintaining that restaurant. Your overhead, your systems and support, while your mom and pop shop can be managed really efficiently, especially if it's a takeout business. You don't need waiters, you're not going to need a host, you don't need a maitre d', you don't need extensive infrastructure supporting this business. You just need to make the food and sell it and make sure you're making margin on that food. You'd be surprised to find out that if you looked under the numbers, a lot of the time these mom and pop shops actually are really good business. They have a lot of business coming in, a lot of volume, and have real profit on it with lower costs. While it's really hard to maintain those larger businesses. But we treat the surface level indicators as shortcuts because our brains just can't take the time to look through all the reality all the time. So this surface level analysis, my main point is that it's wrong most of the time. And you need to get used to your instincts being incorrect and starting to be skeptical. Now, when I look at a nice business, I think, wow, that must cost a lot. When I see someone with a nice car, I say, I wonder how much debt he took on to do that. And I wonder what sacrifices that he made to his wealth, rather than jumping to the conclusion this is a very successful restaurant. So the real concept here is that every business tells two stories. The surface story, your appearances. This is your popularity, your reviews on Yelp, your polish, your perceived quality, what people see and what you want them to see, or the business wants them to see. But the real story is what matters. And the real story is your profitability, your cash flow, your margin. Will your business be alive and profitable over the long term? As we are finance professionals, our whole goal here is to decipher through the noise and find the signal. And that signal is really cash flow at the end of the day. If you were to invest in this business or lend money to this business or run this business, can it generate strong cash flow? If it can't, then you don't really have a successful business. We lose the concept of a business unless you're a non-for-profit, which we're not really trying to dissect in this class. If you are a business, you're established to make a profit, and that comes down to cash flow. You need to challenge those service level narratives with a skeptical mind. And one of the best things that I like from an accounting background is we always say, trust but verify. You could see a successful restaurant and say, yeah, that looks good, and maybe they are telling the truth, but I'm not going to trust it until I really see the data. This is called professional skepticism. So I went through this personally when I owned my recording studio. I owned a recording studio in North Hollywood. I was young, and anyone I told that I had a recording studio, people thought it was the coolest thing ever. I had a mixing board in it, and I had musicians coming in at all times. And whenever I told anyone that I owned a recording studio, people thought, wow, Devon's really doing it. Devon's amazing. But the reality was a really hard business, and I really struggled financially while I ran that business. I had a high fixed cost. I needed leased spaces, soundproofing equipment, professional grade equipment. Constantly things were getting damaged because people were playing music too loud or things were adjusting it. From the outside, I was treated like a big shot by friends and strangers. It had really challenging economics. So when I brought in a client, maybe they didn't pay me until the project was done, and if they weren't happy with how they performed, the project could go on too long. Musicians aren't good financially most of the time. The music industry itself has higher default rates, which means people just don't pay their bills. One time I got paid in a rusted old car because someone couldn't afford to pay me the couple $1,000s that they owed me for the recording time. And the projects were really long, and it was really challenging from a cash flow perspective. So this looked exactly like the kind of place you would build when you totally have made it. But I was struggling financially. I was secretly struggling. After my recording studio failed and I sold it all off, I worked as a bartender and I worked as a waiter for a period of time and started up a small consulting and tutoring business. And when I told people I was doing this, it was not fun. It was not sexy. No one was saying, wow, Devon, you started a small consulting and a tutoring business. You're the coolest guy on the block. No one said anything nice about it, and a lot of people laughed behind my back. Wow, that's the guy who had the recording studio, and now look how far he's fallen. But this was a really good business. People paid me up front. They would pay me for multiple sessions ahead of the sessions and needed no specialized equipment or office. I could just go teach at a Starbucks or a library. Even though it had unimpressive optics, it had really powerful economics. I could just show up and make $50 an hour as a college student teaching accounting or finance, or working with a small business consulting client. And a lot of times I'd just sit up at a Starbucks and invite a bunch of people over. And it was amazing. Some days I'd make $300-400 just tutoring. Really high margins, real cash flow. And then when I would hire other students as contractors to tutor in my stead, I could pay them $20 an hour and they'd get paid hourly. So I didn't have to hire staff. There was really no overhead. And it was just a fantastic business. Even though I felt like a failure, people would make fun of me for owning this small tutoring business and the small consulting business. The numbers told a really different story, and that tutoring business was essential for me paying my way through college and being financially comfortable and paying off my debt from the recording studio. So that's a really good contrast on, hey, a boring tutoring business could be a way better fundamental business from a cash flow perspective than a recording studio, even though the recording studio is more impressive intrinsically. So let's look at those numbers exactly. My monthly income was about $1,500 an hour. Let's look at these numbers in comparison so you can see that the story is really different, right? The story of the recording studio versus the tutoring business is really different when you look at the numbers. The monthly income of the recording studio was about $1,500 a month. I was spending 200 hours. I was working a ton in this recording studio, especially because musicians just love staying up late. And so my effective hourly wage was $7.50. But I spent $60,000 on the equipment in that studio, which is insane. I spent so much money. And so it would have taken me forever to pay that studio back. And I was essentially working for minimum wage. I had bought a very expensive minimum wage job. It was very glamorous, but very expensive minimum wage job with a lot of risk. And that was on a stable month. There was a lot of unstable months, especially during the Great Recession. Now, the tutoring business, I could easily make $4,000 in a given month. I'd spend about 50 hours a month. I'd have some people working for me and doing the tutoring on the side or doing tutoring in my stead. And my effective hourly wage was about $80 an hour. And my initial investment was about $5,000, so much lower than my recording studio. And that initial investment was just making sure I had some contractors on staff to be my tutors, making sure that I paid for my advertising. It was a great business. It's very fulfilling too. The students always loved me because I was able to help them get A's, and it really drove my passion to be a lecturer. So the tutoring business generated over 10 times the hourly income on a fraction of the investments. I had built a better reputation through that than through my recording studio. And I learned a ton about business just by making the mistake of the recording studio versus the tutoring business. And I hope that illustrates to you, if you were to invest in one of these, I recommend you invest in a business like the tutoring business. Don't invest in the recording studio. The tutoring business is more scalable and a better business. The recording studio was more of a challenge. How hard is your money working for you? One measurement is called a return on assets. This is one form of measurement. And that's how much return via percentage you get on every asset you invested. And I got a 30% return on the dollars invested for my recording studio, while a 960% return on my tutoring business. So the tutoring business was extremely effective at turning assets into cash, right? A little bit of investment made a lot of cash. And that's a great way to know if your business is a good business, if your investment is working for you or against you. I have good friends who make tons of money, but are not wealthy. They have nice cars, really nice houses, go out to the fanciest restaurants and fly first class. But I know they are quietly struggling all of the time. If I go to a restaurant with them, they very, very much are happy when I pick up the bill because they want to save those little dollars because of how much they spend on their lifestyle. So they're perceived as wealthy, but their lifestyle is probably propped up by debt. They can't really afford everything that they have, so they are borrowing money to afford that performative lifestyle. Well, I also have a really good friend that I know who is a decamillionaire, extremely wealthy friend, but is very careful with his money. No one would know that he is wealthy. He drives a 20-year-old car. He buys pasta and makes it at home on the weekends when he can't get free food from work, and lives in a modest condo in the Bay Area. But he's content with that. He really likes his life. And whenever he goes out to eat, he always offers to pick up the bill. Whenever he comes over to my place, he buys my daughter a gift. He's always extremely generous. And so there's tons of people that are quietly wealthy, quietly financially responsible. And you almost can pick up that the people that are living that type of lifestyle are probably more successful than the people living the more performative lifestyle, driving the fancy cars. I love the Socrates quote, how many things there are that I do not need. Because real wealth really comes from the ability to not spend money. And we'll go through in this class about how if you lower your expenses by just 10%, you might need millions of dollars less in retirement. There's a power to not spending money. There's a power to cash flow discipline. So real wealth rarely announces itself. It shows up quietly in optionality, peace of mind, the ability to say no. And Socrates knew this way, way long ago. And these courses prove what he said from a financial perspective. So for me, understanding the financial story was how I started changing my own life for the better. That's what I want you to get out of this class and this lecture, is that once you start to understand the narrative that you are portraying versus the reality, you can align your narrative with your reality and actually have a better lifestyle. So for me, when my studio failed, I had $10,000 in credit card debt. I had a $10,000 car that I owed $10,000 on, and I had a negative equity. So I was worth less than nothing. That's not fun. I was underwater. The numbers had been telling me the truth the whole time, and I just wasn't listening. So what did I do? What would you do in this situation? Well, I needed to stop the bleeding. I needed to fix my budget. And so I went through my budget meticulously. And I took my original budget that had no income. Even when I worked, I'd say $0 at the end of the day. And I went to see how I could make that into a profit-bearing story. That I wasn't just some dead-end loser, that I could actually generate a profit and grow my net worth over time. And so I cut expenses ruthlessly. I sold my car. I started taking the bus. I found people that I could couch surf with. I found really cheap places to live. And I was able to create some breathing room. I was actually able to have a positive net income of $1,000 when I was struggling. And that was just life-saving. I was able to start to build my life again. But that wasn't the problem alone. You can only cut costs so much. I was so broke that I was essentially eating bananas and bagels at grocery stores and eating free food at restaurants, and I couldn't cut anymore. So I had to improve my revenue. I had to focus on earning more. But understanding my numbers, understanding the narrative and the truth of the reality rather than relying on debt to prop up my lifestyle, helped me fix all of this. What I want you all to take away is the really boring stuff is what gave me control and power over my situation, right? I had to make a budget. I had to cut costs. I had to start managing my expenses. It was quiet, but it built me resilience. And I eventually was able to compound that resilience to build a substantial net worth. Those habits were really beneficial for me early on. While that display, you get addicted to it. You come to rely on how nice things look in order to build your friendships, in order to build your reputation. And it's really fragile because it's propped up on debt. It's based off of approval and it's expensive. You need to keep feeding that expense. And so that control, that quiet control can really give you so much power. And I want you to realize that that's the same with businesses. So personal finance, businesses, multi-million-dollar deals, all the tools are the same. The tools don't change, just the zeros do, right? And so understanding your narrative is the first step to understanding the difference between narrative and fundamentals. And then you can extrapolate that to business. You can then look at the narrative of businesses, look at the fundamentals, and see if the story matches the fundamentals. In my current consulting practice, I regularly do financial due diligence work, and that's exactly what I'm getting hired to do. We get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to look at a business's fundamentals and see if it matches the story, right? And that's true for investment bankers. That's true for finance all over the world. So this is the fundamental aspect you want to get, narrative versus fundamentals. I always recommend doing this in your personal life first. Try to figure out what story are you projecting? What do you want the world to believe about your life? And then how is that different than what the numbers are telling you? And where's the gap? And then what's the things that you can do in order to bridge that gap to have the largest impact? Once you figure out that and you have that framework in place, you'll realize that's exactly what you would do when you're assessing a business. So it all comes together. It's all tied together beautifully. And that's where we would go into your looking at the balance sheet, you're looking at the income statement, and you're looking at the statement of cash flows, understanding the picture that it paints for you versus what they're telling you about the business. Thank you very much for your time today. Have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture. Bye-bye.